All right, we are live with Alexander Mercouris in London, and joining us from Tbilisi, we have first time on the Duran, Lasha Kasaradze, who has written incredible articles on geopolitics, on neutrality studies and national interest. Lasha, welcome to the Duran. Is there anything else that you would like to tell us about your writings or to promote or plug before we get started?
Uh, I cannot add much more to that generous introduction, Alex. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be on your channel on Duran. I think we all know that you guys have done an incredible job, and we're all proud to be every time I get a chance. And this is my first time on Duran. Really proud to be on your channel. As for my articles, like you said, I have written for the neutrality studies, for national interest, and for Acura with my good colleague and friend James Carden. And I analyze. I'm an international relations analyst, and I focus on former Soviet space and specifically on the South Caucasus.
Fantastic. And we have got a lot to talk about when it comes to the South Caucasus. A lot of action going on. So let's get started. Before I pass it on to you, Alexander, just a quick hello to everyone that is watching us on Odyssey and Rockfin and Rumble, as well as YouTube, and of course the Duran.locals.com. And a big shout out to our moderators. Peter is in the house and Zariel is with us as well. And thank you to our moderators for everything that you do. Alexander, Lasha, let's talk about the Caucasus.
Indeed, let's do so. And there is no better person to discuss the Caucasus with than Lasha. I should say, you all know on the Duran that I was, in fact, in Georgia last month. Lasha was the person who organized the meeting, who invited me there, who organized my trip, who introduced me to all sorts of people. And it was very clear that he knows Georgia and its politics intimately, at multiple levels, both, the public level, the attitudes of people in the streets, the people who live there, but also the political class and what's going on in the politics. And it's not just Georgia that he knows the whole of the South Caucasus. It became very clear to me whilst I was in Georgia that the South Caucasus is also a geopolitical region. And it is a geopolitical region which is very much in the news at the moment. There is political events taking place in Georgia, a developing situation there. There is a political situation developing in Armenia, which appears to be going in the diametrically opposite direction. And then there is Azerbaijan, which is in a different position entirely. And then, of course, there's the outside powers, Russia, the United States, Turkey, Iran. No one better, as I said, to talk about these things with than with Lasha. So Lasha, if we can start, can I start with Georgia? Because when I was there, we were just going through, I felt very much a period of economic and political stabilization. Since then, we've had more sanctions bills navigating through the US Congress. And I was astonished to see yesterday a statement from some official in the European Union saying that the European Union does not consider the government in Georgia legitimate. And by the way, I had an argument a few days ago, a week ago, with somebody who's connected with the European Commission, who insisted to me that the government in Georgia is deeply unpopular and is repudiated by its people. And this is somebody who is distant family, just to say. So all of these things, what is the situation in Georgia? To me, it looked, as you know, very stable whilst I was there, but clearly the pressure is on.
Alexander, thank you once again for such a generous introduction. I appreciate it. And I also want to mention that all my colleagues told me that you knew more about Georgia, certain aspects, historic aspects of it that we all did collectively. So your knowledge and expertise on the region is superb. So you're putting me on a spot here. If it's your extended family member, I don't, I've always, argued that in the South Caucasus, Republic of Georgia, under the current administration, has been stable. And the idea that Kaya Colossus of the world are saying that this is some dictatorial regime, and that I don't know if you've heard of the latest push by Colossus to cancel the visa free regime, the visa-free travel for Georgians is another sort of madness, if you will, in the long line of crazy things that Brussels have been trying to impose on Georgia or blame Georgia for. But the idea that this is a less democratic government with all its flaws, I'll be the first one to say it, but fundamentally speaking, the idea that this is a less democratic government, or that it has en masse faked the elections, or that the opposition radical party was supposed to be in power because somehow they are the ones who won the elections. I mean, the list goes on and on. I mean, all of that is basically a false narrative, constructed and created, unfortunately, within the capitals of Georgian strategic partners, United States and Brussels. And here, the irony behind this whole thing is that Georgia continues to be a extremely pro-Western republic, wishing that one day it would be accepted in the economic and security infrastructure of the collective West. They continue to think this, they continue to believe in this, and you got to appreciate that. And so the idea that a collective West can come up with narratives that says that this is the government that is pro-Russian, or that they are turning their backs against the West is simply not true. We're talking about geopolitics and national security interests 101, and that has been translated as, or reconstructed in Washington as, okay, these guys are not listening to us anymore, they must be pro-Russian. This is the era of their golden boy Saakashvili is over. The free hand sort of that roamed and ruled the country between the 2003 and 2012. Supported by Washington, obviously, that era is over, and I would say 99.9% the reason behind this frustration, to put it mildly, that's coming out of Washington and Brussels has to do with the fact that era is over in Georgia, and that overall has to do with the change in the international system, the shift from unipolarity to multipolarity, and then Trump administration's coming to power. Now, this might not be directly as a causal mechanism for what's happening in Georgia, but when traditional foreign policy elites in Washington look at this change, they think, okay, are we losing Georgia, this tiny republic in the middle of the South Caucasus, who was this loyal, sort of a real, to the point of self-destruction client state? Are we losing it? And so they express, they don't know what to do with themselves, really, and they're coming up with these narratives that are have nothing to do with reality on the ground. Because if you dissect the situation, if you truly analyze what's happening, the current Georgian Dream government is more democratic, with all its flaws. I repeat, and I underline that point. But I don't much look at the, Georgia sort of the morass of domestic politics. I look at the way they handle themselves in terms of geopolitics and international relations, and I think they do deserve some high marks, even though I would say they're extremely passive, and I would encourage them to become more proactive regionally, as well as especially with their partners in Washington, with the United States and Brussels in general. It seems to me that they're so they have so much complexes. It's got to do with Georgian mentality. It's got to do with this sort of this victim psychology where since the country went through those 9 years of basically state terror supported by the West, I kind of understand how, collectively speaking, they're kind of lost in many respects. They don't know how to speak to the Anglo-Saxon world, if you will. But the idea that they have conducted incomparably more democratic elections with flaws, that they have conducted a pragmatic, strategically, conducive to the outside environment foreign policy goes without saying. I mean, you cannot deny this, and the fact that they've withstood an enormous pressure to somehow become a platform for military support for Ukraine, which would put them obviously directly against Moscow for the second time around, because we all remember what happened in 2008. The fact that they avoided this from happening. They deserve high marks. They understood the strategic risks involved. The Georgian Dream did, and they acted on it. Now, going back to what European Commission and the globalists are saying, and the neoconservatives in Washington are saying, this is basically the same rhetoric. This is a rhetoric full of anger and frustration that is devoid of any realistic assessment of what's happening on the ground. So, and just to summarize this, what's happening on the ground are several things: relative economic prosperity, stability, and on the foreign policy front, pragmatic success in conducting pragmatic foreign policy towards Russia. And those things somehow have worked together in tandem. And this government has managed to juggle all those three areas together without dropping any one of them, at least not yet. Considering consider the fact that they did this under enormous pressure from none other than Washington and Brussels.
Indeed. Can I just make one thing absolutely clear? The person I spoke to, it was a very, very heated conversation, by the way, is a member of my extended family who works for the European Commission. Oh. So, I mean, and that person, we had an argument because that person was insisting that the Georgian government is a Russian puppet. I said that Georgia does not even have diplomatic relations with Russia. This person denied the fact, went to the BBC website and Google and showed me the address of the Russian embassy. And I said, yes, it may be there, but it's closed. So it's very difficult to get this across. But as I say, it was a very, very heated conversation indeed. Now, just to quickly sum up about Georgia, and I've already made these points myself, I got the sense of a country that's returned to stability. I saw the size of the permanent demonstration that's outside the parliament, and it came across to me as about 150 to 300 people max. In other words, a very small protest indeed, and a very quiet and cheerful one, by the way. I mean, there was no great anger or, things that you would expect in a pre-revolutionary situation. Definitely a recovering economy, but clearly also a country that's seen some very, very hard times. And that was something that I sensed very much from the people. The guide said as much to me. I don't think people want to sacrifice the situation at all. So those are just my quick observations about Georgia. What about Georgia's foreign policy? I mean, because is it realigning with the West, or is it realigning with Russia? Because we now have another crisis further in the Southern Caucasus. There's people saying things are going to happen with Armenia, with Azerbaijan. Supposedly these two countries are coming together against Russia. And I actually saw a claim that what that means is that there's an attempt to try by Russia to use Georgia against Armenia and Azerbaijan. Is there any truth in that?
No evidence to suggest that at all. In fact, if Georgia continues to conduct this for the way it's been conducting its foreign policy in the region, it stands a very good chance of avoiding entanglements or avoiding that sort of like the choice between selecting, say, Russo-Iranian strategic line versus sort of the Turkic world line, which is Azerbaijan, Turkey, Israel, the West, the Mediterranean. So I think that Georgia has no beef with either of that strategic divide that is unfolding as we speak, has unfolded as we speak in the South Caucasus. I think what you hear is a whole lot of alarmism. With all due respect to your family member, given the fact that given who his employer, her employer is, I'm not surprised. I think there is a strong ideology that rules the day still, unfortunately, but the wisdom of the Georgian society has sort of beaten that ideology because the Georgian society, the nation that continues to be very pro-Western, also realized at the same time that listening to these narratives will be disastrous for Georgia. So it took a while, but finally, collectively speaking, the society has realized that believing in words, believing in this extreme ideology and idealism and these propaganda narratives that NATO was coming to rescue Georgia or that the European Union is coming to, and then sort of placing Georgia as a hostage. If you don't do this, we will take away your free, travel regime, to Europe or something else that they might come up with. This is the kind of blackmail that the Georgian society, not to mention the political party, right, the government, has realized that they've been facing. And so now they're saying maybe we should take a step back and think about this and collectively realize that none of NATO is certainly not coming. We're not going to become a member of NATO. That's ridiculous. Let's look at Ukraine, our brotherly nation, really, right? Historically, friends of Georgia, Ukrainian people and Ukrainian government. And so let's not turn into the small version of Ukraine specifically because of the security issues and the promises that were made to Ukraine. Look at them now, right? So they're asked this. They actually are saying this. I mean, everyone I talk to, and unless you are completely insane, you're not going. They're not even the ones who dislike this government are saying, okay, fine, stability is better than what was to come. Okay, so what you see then is this radicalized forces, trained, equipped, supported, legitimized from Western capitals in Georgia, who have sort of, taken on this monopoly of creation of social ideas and social of opinion, manufacturing consent, if you will, and they've been running with it for the past 15 to 20 years. Since 2003 up until the Georgian Dream and Ivanishvili defeated that whole United National Movement. But guess what? They still have very strong sort of leftover sort of inertia, if you will. But even they are now realizing that, again, the society in general has realized that they have nothing more to offer. They have bankrupted themselves, both on the ideological front, on just simply speaking ideas front. They just ran out of ideas and now and as a result of it, it's trying to replace it with radicalism. So they don't know what to do with themselves. And that's the problem. If there were a constructive, democratic, a creative opposition in this country, then everyone that I've spoken to would welcome that process. If there was a democratic opposition, not some absolutist radicals who want to overthrow everything and then the hell with what comes next, right? Which is exactly what they're saying outright, openly. But a democratic opposition who will offer ideas, who will argue, who will present their case, who will admit their mistakes as well as admit and call for compromise in democratic politics, then the Georgian society would welcome that. But unfortunately and tragically, there is a void where you have only legitimately elected government, and those who argue that they're not legitimate, they have not provided any smoking gun evidence, because this is the fourth time that they've been elected, by the way. So what you get instead is this government that says, look, let's talk, let's argue, let's discuss, let's debate, let's create some sort of a space for social discourse, but anything short of that, we're not going to tolerate your garbage, really, because this is not constructive. All you want to do is overthrow a legitimately democratically elected government and then throw the country back into the era of this, colorful revolutions and, the freedom agenda and, neoliberal sort of, expansionism and ideology. And you will cause another 2008 when Russia is already occupying the region, but the country. But then this time around, there was no doubt. There's never been no doubt in my mind that this time around, if it escalated to that point in terms of security, that Moscow will take Tbilisi. And guess what? Those who are speaking of pro-Westernism or freedom, or that this government is made up of a bunch of cowards, they will be the ones who will probably leave the country first. They will be the ones who will probably run. Mm-hmm. So, in terms of strategic patience, in terms of wisdom, in terms of realizing that in the long term that the current policies are incomparably better for the Georgian people than the alternative. Again, my assessment is that this government deserves sort of high marks. What happens now? Again, to go back to your original point, regionally, again, what's happening in the region is impossible to talk about this without the collective West's effort to cause another sort of anti-Russian 2.0 collective effort to weaken Russia, right? So to go back to that whole strategic divide, regional divide, so you have the Turkic world, Central Asia, Azerbaijan, you have Turkey, led by Turkey, supported by Turkey, and then this is the sort of the coalition of mostly anti-Iran, I would say. Azerbaijan has no beef with Russia, let's be honest here, even though what happened was sort of this brouhaha that happened with in Yekaterinburg, and the arrests, and as brutal as those arrests were, another response from Baku, this was just a political, it was a scandal. I wouldn't call it anything more than that. I think Aliyev is an extremely clever leader. He's a good friend of Georgia and the Georgian people, and he understands that there are red lines. And while I would argue that this incident sort of showed Moscow, no doubt, it showed Moscow that Baku cannot be treated as Moscow's sort of second fiddle, or the younger brother, the whole Soviet concept of looking at these former Soviet republics. While Baku and Azerbaijan with Aliyev's leadership sort of showed that to Moscow, he nevertheless realizes that in terms of security, there are serious red lines. And so in geoeconomic sort of connectivity, if you want to look at it that way, yes, it created sort of its own strategic flexibility. Baku did, correct? It returned and restored its sovereignty fully, correct? Nagorno-Karabakh. And yes, it's among the three republics is the most powerful republic. But let's make no mistake, in terms of understanding national security interests of Russia, regional geopolitics, in my opinion, in my view, very little, if anything, has changed. Baku realizes that pushing the envelope, for example, we all remember recent comments by Erdogan suggesting that he might place his troops in Baku, in Azerbaijan, which is NATO. And so, we all know sort of the response was not even worth the news, if you know what I mean. I mean, I think Lavrov or I don't know if it was Zakharova or whoever it was. They said, "Guys, come on, let's not be silly here, because that would be the for Baku it would be a disaster, and especially now for when Russia has become so much more powerful militarily. It's basically developed a military economy, as a result of its special operation in Ukraine. These republics stand no chance. So I think Baku understands this perfectly well. There is a almost $5 billion trade that Baku has with Moscow, with Russia. So there is a serious intercourse and economic activities between the two countries. So this beef of Russia refusing to apologize for downing of Baku's passenger plane where 38 people died. It was a horrible tragedy. I'll be the first one to admit it. It's all politics. It's all regional bickering that is caused by something, that is driven by someone. Perhaps, I don't mean to be all conspiratorial here, but I think we are seeing now sort of calming down of the situation. It's been, I think, over a month now that this happened. June 27th, I think it was, that the Ekaterinburg arrest took place. And we are seeing now sort of gradual calming of the situation. And I attribute that to the realization in Baku, in Tbilisi, well, maybe not in Yerevan, but definitely in Baku, that look, enough is enough, and maybe geostrategically we stand no chance in terms of going at it against Russia. So we've achieved a lot. Right, I'm thinking that's the thinking should be in Baku, correct? We have achieved a lot. Azerbaijan, under Aliyev's leadership, has returned its historic and internationally recognized territory of Nagorno-Karabakh and restored its national borders and sovereignty. And so let's just continue with sort of engaging in geoeconomic projects, and let's leave on the side sort of security competition with Moscow, because we simply stand no chance. In my opinion, that if that should be the thinking in Baku, because Russia, let's be honest here, remains to be the only country in the region with direct vital national security interests, both in Ukraine and in the South Caucasus. And I don't see any way where Moscow, will give up on those interests, so to speak. So I think that's the divide right now. Plus, with Israel, obviously, we understand how Israel sort of had cultivated. When the Soviet Union broke up, it was Israel that was starting to cultivate relations, correct, in the South Caucasus with Baku. But Israel's agenda is, we all know what. I mean, it cares, against, it has its own interests against Iran in the region, and sort of to circle back to the point when I said that this is impossible to look at the region without this sort of outside sort of strategic circle. This is what I mean, because we're looking at. So the Turkic world is basically the chain of, Turkey, Israel, Azerbaijan, and yes, it can, there is no other way to look at it other than to say this is to balance against Iran. And then whether or not Russia will allow it to lose Iran, that's another question, which I don't think it will.
Yeah, I completely agree. Can I just say something?
Yeah. Sure.
You change your perspective on this whole region radically when you go there, and I think this is once I've read an awful lot of commentary recently about all kinds of plans to create alliances with Armenia and Azerbaijan and against Russia and all of that. When you are actually in the region, and I was only there for a short time, but it becomes immediately clear that these plans are absolutely unviable. And I'm going to say something else. Whilst I was in Georgia, I met somebody from the United States. You probably work out who it was, but we won't name him. Very well-connected person. And we were talking about the American presence in Armenia and the size of the embassy there. And he made it absolutely clear to me that that's really not about Russia at all. It's about Iran. That the actual issue for the US and Israel is much more about Iran than it is about Russia. And that was made extremely clear to me by this person, and I'm sure he was telling the complete and precise truth, by the way. So can I just discuss this a little bit further now? Because the other country that's in this region is, of course, Armenia. And Armenia, at some levels, at least from a distance, seems to me to be going through the same road, following the same road that Georgia did, but perhaps 2 decades behind. I mean, we've had a change of government that was brought about through street protests, not very different from what happened in Georgia in 2003. A prime minister who is extremely pro-Western in much the same way that Saakashvili was. He's provoked, or he's been involved in wars which have already lost Armenia territory, just as Saakashvili's wars lost Georgia territory. One of the things that I discovered while I was in Georgia, this isn't something we talked about ourselves, but I learned it from people in Tbilisi, in the streets. The attack on the church in Georgia, effectively, really upset people hugely in Georgia, and all of the various things that were involved, the importation of ideas from the West, that didn't go down well with Georgians at all. You're seeing something very similar happen in Armenia. Is this a viable, sustainable process in Armenia? Or will Armenia return to the kind of road, follow the kind of further the road that Georgia has gone through, which is experiment with all of these changes and then eventually find its way back, if you like? I mean, what is your feelings about this? I should say that when you're in Georgia, the connections, the strength of the connections with Armenia at a deep cultural and historic level become very obvious.
Overwhelmingly, Alexander, just to give you a very short answer, but then I will just give you my opinion. Overwhelmingly, my conversations, and then generally speaking, how the society sort of looks at Armenia, they're thinking, what is Armenia doing? What are they hoping they can achieve? That's the reaction. And sort of slightly, because Pashinyan has recently visited and he saw he visited Tbilisi, he saw the prime minister. He was probably thinking, okay, let's go take this pro-Western trip once more. That was probably the conversation or encouragement that he thought he would come and sort of relay and convey to the official Tbilisi. But overwhelmingly on a popular level, I think. I mean, I know that the people that I speak to saying Armenia really doesn't know what to do with itself because geopolitically speaking, let's deductively look at this. Where is Armenia going to go? Who in his or her right mind can think that Armenia can be plucked out of Moscow's or out of its geopolitical core and plugged into the West, especially and critically when the West is nowhere near to be prepared or willing to guarantee Armenia's security. If the West wants to, which is to me, that's the number one thing, right? If you want to sort of egg another country against a superpower, a regional superpower, a nuclear power, I would say just a great power, right? Russia, then what are you promising that country in its place? What are you trying to do? In Georgia, we saw they promised bunch of things, but they delivered nothing, and Georgia almost got finished off basically as a small state. There is no doubt, Russia, by the way, let's not get confused with the idea that with the fact that Russia is looking at Armenia from this sort of acquiescing point of view, that it is willing to give up on Armenia somehow, or that it is willing to bring in, Western troops, which is NATO, into, Russia has in Gyumri, Russia has its own military contingent. That, in my view, is more than enough to take care of Armenia, for example, right? Armenia has been so intertwined economically, militarily with Russia over the years, over 30 plus years since its independence, since the breakup of the Soviet Union, that the idea that Armenia can be somehow decoupled from Russia's interests is yet another attempt, a hoax, this myth creation from the collective West. And what is France going to do? I mean, of all the places, it is France that's been pushing this, right? Correct me if I'm wrong on this. I think it's Paris, it's Macron that's been pushing this idea, and yet, and look at the dark and deep cynicism of this. Now that Armenia has lost Nagorno-Karabakh as it saw, right? As it saw it. I'm not judging here. Again, Armenia always thought that Nagorno-Karabakh was, they spent over 30 years since the late 80s up until 2023, right? They were fanatically, sort of defending the idea that Nagorno-Karabakh would one day be returned to Armenia, correct? Look where they are now. And look how the West is ignoring this. They're basically everyone acquiesced, right? So Azerbaijan got its own territory with Nagorno-Karabakh, restored its territory, internationally recognized. Armenia got nothing. And now you are seeing the collective West forgetting conveniently what happened and just pushing Armenia, whatever is left of it, into the arms of into this sort of narratives, propaganda-based sort of policy that it is constructing around Yerevan. Point that I'm trying to make here is that Georgia too is is under that danger. It's is experiencing that risk of, if the situation escalates and South Ossetia and Abkhazia, Russia shaves off South Ossetia and Abkhazia completely, right? Even though it recognizes these two regions as independent states, correct? And if things become even worse, and Russia says, you know what, I'm just going to come in, take whatever is going to be left of Georgia without these two regions, obviously, I will further separated from the West in terms of NATO and European Union. But then the West will start, I guarantee you, the West then would start saying, Georgia now deserves its rightful place in the West. So in other words, the point being that in Washington, neither in Washington nor in Brussels, there is no fundamental interest, in my view, that Georgia's national security must be maintained. Because what happened with Armenia, without Azerbaijan, without Nagorno-Karabakh, it's catastrophic loss that Armenia experienced, which is a huge change in the past 30 to 35 years in the South Caucasus, right? Has been ignored. This fundamental fight of Armenia to restore its sovereignty as it saw fit, has been ignored. And now they're sort of playing with it, if you will. They're saying, even without Nagorno-Karabakh, let's see what we can do. And it's almost as if the West found more flexibility without the Nagorno-Karabakh issue to support Armenia. Because when this conflict was happening, when Russia was in between and playing, the whole historic sort of balancing act, I don't remember collective West sort of talking about this, pushing Armenia into its economic and sort of security infrastructure. Correct? I mean, I never saw that. It was only after we started seeing this push or sort of identifying Armenia as yet another potential hotspot in the South Caucasus, as a potential sort of a member of the collective West. Only after they lost Nagorno-Karabakh in this disastrous and catastrophic war. So you see the danger, you see the sort of the cynicism and the fakeness of what's happening here in terms of, even if we lose Abkhazia completely or Samachablo, South Ossetia completely, no one in the West will oppose it. No, even though it is the United States that's been backing the idea of sort of non-recognition in the United Nations, right? So it's always backed the idea that South Ossetia and Abkhazia belong rightfully to Georgia. If one day we wake up and those regions are gone and Russia sort of incorporates them, right? There is no one that will either defend Georgia militarily, right? Obviously, let alone militarily. But even, in other words, Georgia will become sort of this subject of, subject of, tragic, articles and analytic articles and op-eds saying, well, here we're seeing Russia, this draconian regime, just dissected Georgia even further, and whatever is left of mainland Georgia, maybe we can help it become member of the West. So this is such a clownish, theatrical tragedy. This is very tragic if you think, if you think of what I'm saying, because it is now again that Armenia is being pushed into the West, being legitimized. But with what? Armenia lost everything, right? And then on top of that, you have Russia, who says, "Okay, guys, are you foolish enough to tell me that I am going to release Armenia to some, security infrastructure in the West, let's just say NATO, and I'm going to sit back and look at it unfold." So Armenia again is being driven by its nose. It's being fooled, and it has to tread extremely carefully not to push buttons in Moscow, not to provoke Russia in terms of its security. Economically speaking, Moscow, I think, will acquiesce and might look the other way. By the way, it is looking the other way. If Zangezur corridor, if it loses Zangezur corridor, the control that it wants to maintain over Zangezur corridor, what is Moscow going to do? Point being that national security interests, geopolitics, and just generally speaking, security guarantees are incomparably more important and vital for Moscow. And this is where both Georgia and Armenia are on the losing end. And their chances of not going there is to conduct a pragmatic foreign policy. Thankfully, Georgia learned that lesson. What Armenia is doing is let the Armenian people decide and let their government decide. But I don't think that that's a very smart policy. Hopefully, they won't escalate it to that level.
Can I just discuss something that I was confronted with while I was in Georgia? And this is this concept of the NGO state, which is what I was told by some people in Georgia. Georgia had become that it was basically being run by people from all kinds of NGOs that were basically Western financed. And in fact, there was an extraordinary speech, which I think you sent to me by Horton, Stuart Horton.
Scott Horton, yes.
Scott Horton, sorry.
Yes,
in which he discussed all of this and how the Georgian cabinet at one time was basically people who were basically working for the West, or who were in fact ultimately Westerners. My brother, who has been to Armenia many times, I've never been there, he told me that this is exactly the same pattern in Armenia as well. Is that your impression? That again, it is a policy that is very detached from Armenian actual realities, but is more basically a superstructure that the West has funded and created, which dominates the media landscape, that has a strong control over the universities and the teaching institutions, and which basically governs Armenia, but which doesn't actually have very much depth in the country, just as it didn't in Georgia as well.
Yes, I think that the whole neoliberal structure, if it's entering Armenia to the extent and with the intensity that it did Georgia, for example, then I think they won't be in a good place soon. Just to go back to that whole church scandal and the attack on the church, yes, I completely agree with you. It was the same pattern with Saakashvili. And this is all, I'm not saying necessarily that they were trying to sort of destroy the Georgian Orthodox Church or decouple it completely from, but there was an attempt to, this was the process of creating the new Georgian citizen, right? So this modernity had to come in, this neoliberal economics, had to enter the Georgian society, libertarianism, and the country was sort of shoved down, they shoved down their throats, these these neoliberal economic principles, only liberal internationalism could modernize Georgia, right? So the entire narrative was we need to take Georgia out of its sort of traditional core, which is the Georgian Orthodox Church. To the extent that this is happening also in Armenia, I see parallels of the sort of a neoliberal internationalism taming, if you will, what the Christian church in Armenia might be thinking, what the national security interests and sort of societal traditional interests of Armenia must be. Because as conservative as the Orthodox Church is and as omnipresent it is, there is still a separation between the church and the state in Georgia, the Georgian church has historically played, a role of, keeping Georgia intact, sort of encouraging the Georgian society to stick with, its core sort of Georgianness, if you will. And while some outside of Georgia in the West think that that's creates some sort of a hierarchical opposition against their programs of neoliberalism and postmodernism or whatever you want to call it, it is the Georgian church and sort of the spiritual national consciousness which it has deepened always throughout centuries and encouraged the republic to sort of stand strong and survive against many enemies. So if Armenia is trying, if Pashinyan's idea now is the goal is to weaken that element of the socio-political structure of Armenia by hitting and weakening the church, then again, I think I don't think this is going to be have a counter reaction, in my opinion, because in Georgia it did. And so but then to your earlier point, if you don't mind reminding me,
the NGOs,
the NGOs, yes, yeah. Yes, the NGOs was sort of the instrument. What I just said about this whole neoliberal project, NGOs were used as sort of physical, material instruments of implementing those policies. Not to mention that our good colleague Almut Rechanovsky has worked on that for many, many years, and she has a very good sort of analytic professional experience that she has over the years sort of rightfully given rightful analysis when she criticizes the NGO class as sort of a mechanism, if you will, as a way to get into the Georgian middle class, if you will, because these guys were paid lots of money, these NGO CEOs and those who were running these NGO companies, they were all coming from this money, the capital was coming from Washington and from grants and from European Union and Brussels. So one of the reasons why they're so adamant about this whole law that requires them to declare their income, their foreign income, they're so resistant precisely because it's a great source of income for them. Not to mention the fact that they've also accumulated enormous power, societal power. And of course, they are the modern version of what a Georgian should be. So how can anybody argue with them, right? They are the ones that will sort of lead Georgia out of darkness into the Western sort of social, political, and economic infrastructure that will finally, sort of enlighten Georgia, if you will, which is exactly the narrative that had always supported this NGO class. And now with Trump's, assault on USAID, obviously that helped. I have to say that it helped because USAID was, and I think there are a few in the West, right? They talk about this former USAID employee. I cannot recall his name now, but they're directly talking about how there was this determined strategy within this organization to meddle and to strengthen the NGO sector in such republics as in such countries and places as Georgia, especially after the fall of the former the Soviet Union, and then Saakashvili was sort of the NGO child, if you will, the NGO psycho boy, if you will, of these narratives. But if the same thing is happening in Armenia, and I think it is, the NGO sector will cause problems, but then I mean, there is no mathematical certainty here, but if the society sort of wakes up and sees what these NGOs are, truly represent, then the Armenian society, they're conservative, they're very tough. They won't tolerate any sort of social engineering projects that these NGOs entail and always wanted to implement. In Georgia, at least. So I don't think they stand a chance. But mostly, Alexander, I think if you want to look at Armenia, I think we'll have to look at it from the security point of view, because culturally, fine, we can push Armenia into, say, the hands of, I don't know, France, and they can do business together, and they can do economic intercourse together, and that's fine. But where is Armenia going in terms of it being a landlocked country, which has always been a problem for Armenia? And then where is it going without any security guarantees? Yeah. So we are seeing this repeating before our eyes. The only hope now is that Pashinyan won't get too excited because he thinks that the West found some long lost love and respect for Pashinyan, and now they think that they can. He thinks that sort of they can make him the member of the exclusive club, so to speak.
So just one very last question, basically. All these reports, rumors, theories that you see, people writing about them, an Armenian, Azerbaijanian, Turkish alliance against Russia. You don't really think this is going to happen?
No, I don't think. The only thing that might happen is, are we going to get squeezed? Georgia, Armenia. I don't even think that Georgia will. Some say that what if Georgia becomes faces a choice? You either come sort of this Western route, which is this Turkic world, Azerbaijan, Turkey, Israel, the West, the Mediterranean, or you are going to be stuck with Iran and Russia. Potentially, sure, it's a small state. If the situation escalates, Georgia might even be asked to be used as a platform, as a logistical military platform against Iran. And that would be an extremely difficult situation for Georgia. Does that risk exist? Yes. What is the probability and is it plausible that they will put Georgia into that position? In that position, I don't think right now, looking at the regional politics, I don't think that's the case. I think Georgia will continue to be a conduit, the sort of geoeconomic, the state in the South Caucasus through which these geoeconomic projects will run. Where Azerbaijan will continue its relations with Georgia, using its geoeconomic sort of connectivity, energy connectivity projects. China is also a huge player in this, correct? Russia, many are saying that, and it's obvious that Russia's one of the major reasons why Russia needs this clean victory, if you will, military solution in Ukraine, is because it is very much aware of what China is thinking, what Beijing is thinking, and so we can see and India is also extremely sort of deeply involved in this. Maybe not in security terms, but India has serious economic interests. It is competing with Pakistan. It is building this Jabahar port coming from the north-south Jabahar port out of Iran that will allow it access to the North Central Asia and then via Russia to Europe. So you see how this, Eurasian political space is being shaped. So to the extent that, first of all, I don't think that Russia will allow a loss, so to speak, of Iran, right? Russia will, in my opinion, because strategically, if Iran falls, Russia's situation will be marginalized, in my view. And it will have a much harder time, sort of finishing up its adventurism in Ukraine. I think Iran plays a significant role for Russia. And so I think, given that, what is this sort of Turkic world strategy is up to, or thinking, what is it hoping for, is hard to say at this point.
No. Lasha, this is where we're going to end. Just on that very last point, by the way, the Russian and Iranian defense ministers have just met, and Putin's just had a meeting with Larijani, who is Khamenei's chief security advisor. So, I mean, I agree with you, by the way, completely. Now, if you can just wait a few moments, because I'm sure Alex has some questions to put to you from our viewers, but this is where I finish, and I just wanted to say thank you, Lasha, for coming onto our program, and I'm sure we'll be having you again many times in the future.
Thank you both very much.
Lasha, you have 10, 15 minutes to answer a couple questions?
Sure.
All right, great. Let's start off with Sanjeva, who says, Lasha, what do you think about what Aliyev said in Ukraine, telling them to continue fighting and condemning Russia? Is he trying to push the red line further?
No, I don't think Aliyev is, no. I think, just to go back to my original point, Baku realizes perfectly well that it has no strategic interest in provoking Russia vis-a-vis the Turkic world, that whole, Azerbaijan, Israel, Turkey connection, or on an individual basis. We've seen this. I mean, we see Turkey do the same thing, and yet it still backs down because it doesn't want to truly provoke Russia. Turkey and Russia have gone through ups and downs in their relationship, and Azerbaijan is nowhere near where Turkey stands regionally, and given its sort of post-Soviet tradition, Soviet tradition, Baku understands that. Simply going into, provoking Kiev against Moscow is a foolish policy, and I think if I'm Aliyev, I'm thinking how to calm things down and how to enjoy the first ever found sort of prestige in the region. Given its restoration of its sovereignty and return of Nagorno-Karabakh, and engage in money making, as much money as you can make, basically, from these geoeconomic projects, and mend relations with Moscow and continue with this economic intercourse with the West. So I don't see any strategic plan in Baku unfolding where they can be encouraging Kiev to go. By the way, Kiev is a losing case. I mean, why would you want to, invest your political strategy in Kiev? So I just don't see that happening.
From Jungle Jin, your thoughts on the consequences if Azerbaijan cuts off the north-south road and allows Western access to the Caspian, and Turkey joins the European Union?
Well, Turkey joining the European Union, in my opinion, has, very little to do perhaps with these geoeconomic projects. I don't think Turkey will join the European Union, first of all. But what was the first part of this question? North-south?
If Azerbaijan cuts off the north-south road or corridor, the consequences of such an action.
Well,
Western access to the Caspian Sea, and allows Western access to the Caspian.
Well, that's what they're planning on doing. Planning is a strong word, but that's what they're tilting towards. I mean, India, that basically means that Iran will have to be plucked out of this whole equation. Iran has to be isolated. So if we're talking about isolating Russia and Iran, let's just say out of Zangezur corridor, then it will weaken it will weaken Moscow first and foremost, because Moscow wants control of the entire region. There's a 44-kilometer region, a kilometer road that connects Nakhichevan with mainland Azerbaijan, and that's a critical point of it. And so isolating Iran, in other words, bringing in the West as sort of this monopolistic geoeconomic player, in my opinion, automatically entails the idea of isolating Iran. And even, but then again, going back to India, what is India going to do? Are they going to give up on the Jawahar port? Because India sees this via Iran as a strategic access point to the west, going up from the south to the north in the Central Asia. So I don't think it will be that easy for this whole Turkic world strategy to isolate Iran, because again, you got that 500-pound gorilla in the region called Russia. I doubt that Russia will allow sort of the Syrianization of Iran. It lost Syria now, so Iran plays strategically a critical role. And by the way, with Armenia, in terms of sort of cold geopolitics, I think Armenia is better off within that Russia-Iran, tripartite, location, geopolitical space, rather than thinking that it can be plucked out and go against the logic of geopolitics, if you will, and thinking that it will go into West, or the West will take care of it. So yeah, it's an intertwined. It's a convoluted answer, but I think cutting off North-South trade, it means isolating Iran, in my opinion, and that's just not going to happen. Yeah.
From Nikos, a two-part question. I want to talk about the Caucasus now. We see Georgia slowly moving towards Russia. In Armenia, Pashinyan has 11% approval, according to Pro-West. Part two, now he wants to join Azerbaijan and Turkey, also known as the country that invaded him. How do people keep supporting him? And can Armenia elect the guy who wants to cooperate with Russia, or has Azerbaijan won?
Well, first of all, it's a sort of a regional diplomatic revolution, if you will, to witness the fact that Armenia is talking with Ankara, right, with Erdogan, right? I think this person who just asked the question, he mentioned that. So yes, it's very odd, which is part of this entire sort of conversation we are having. How Armenia, the idea that Armenia will be strategically allied with Turkey. Now we're hearing that Pashinyan is even willingly telling Erdogan to forget the whole genocide thing, that they will no longer sort of push that line, of admitting that there was a genocide. So you're seeing some radical change, unprecedented change. To me, there are no fundamentals that back that change. I don't see any reason how this can be sustainable. So in terms of the second part of the question was support for Pashinyan. If the traditional strategic culture of Armenian society takes over or starts to resist, then yeah, support for Pashinyan might decline. I don't know what the percentages now are, but I simply don't think that it's my opinion that if Pashinyan stays on this course, more traditional elements of the Armenian society will challenge him on this. To what extent, it's hard to say, but unless he starts to use some autocratic methods to subjugate the opposition, to isolate dissenting voices and avoid some fundamental questions, then his popularity will decline. It is already declining because he doesn't have any strategic plan as to what it is that he wants to. How is he going to answer to his own populace? What it is that the West is offering Yerevan, and I think he's got a good answer to that. question.
Right. From DF, Pashinyan's grandparents are from Kharkov. Who is Pashinyan working for, and will the army let him build a corridor?
This is sort of a little bit of a conspiratorial flair there. I'm not sure who he's. What does he or she mean by who Pashinyan is working for? If Pashinyan thinks that it is the collective West, that
right, a collective West,
yeah,
maybe a connection with Ukraine or something along those lines.
Correct. I think it's a lost case. We all, by the way. We see the patterns of this. When this political controversy happened with arrests and everything in Ekaterinburg, Zelensky sort of offered, didn't Zelensky offer Azerbaijan sort of a way out or something? Sort of, yeah, but that was foolish to begin with, and that entire process sort of died down almost immediately. Because it was so fragile, not fragile, but it was so empty strategically, intellectually, and politically, it just stood no chance. If the question, if the a listener's question is about that, then implies that somehow the collective West is employing Pashinyan, then Pashinyan stands no chance. If I'm Pashinyan, I would say the following: okay, give me money. Help me with the economy, modernize my economy, try to help me that way. But don't ask me to, go against Moscow's national security interests, because that will be the end of it. Because I know that you won't provide me with any security guarantees. Given, Russia's armies and military infrastructure in Gvimri, it's a matter of minutes and hours before Russia takes Yerevan, if it escalates to that extent. So I keep saying this: Moscow might acquiesce to sort of economic adventurisms of Yerevan with the West, but again, in terms of Macron promising, Pashinyan, that it will take care of, guarantee Armenia's, national security. That's absurd. They cannot even agree on helping Ukraine. That's absurd. And I think Pashinyan has to tread very, very carefully. It has to keep the balance between Moscow and. I'm not saying that what Pashinyan is doing catastrophic automatically. Again, I think there is a chance for Armenia to, use some sort of economic benefits out of this. But again, when it comes to geopolitics and national security interests, Russia stands no chance because the West won't protect it.
Yeah, don't listen to Macron. Anyway, one final question.
Listening
Lasha,
to Macron will be a disaster.
Yeah, exactly. Just for you to comment on, if you would like, on the NGOs. Florina says the NGOs infiltrated the state in Romania as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to comment on NGO infiltration in general and what they did in Romania and what's going on in Georgia, Armenia, etc.
Yeah, in Romania, what's going on in Romania, I haven't paid attention lately. I just know that those who advocate freedom and democracy, they are canceling elections and they're arresting people who are who are winning elections. What was the presidential candidate's name that they Georgescu, whose elections they canceled. Yeah. Look, with NGOs, having grown up in the States, the idea of NGOs to me has always been to point out the defects of the government, of the state, right? Basically, you point out some violations, you advocate, you engage in some advocacy work, fine. In Georgia, perhaps now even in Armenia, in Romania. By the way, with Prednistrovia and Moldova, what's happening is also very much similar because sure. The lady there, Moldova's, yes, the Sandu, she's running an autocratic government there. She's running. She won the elections barely because of her outside Romanians who live outside the country, they had to pull in those votes, and that's how she barely defeated the opposition member. I think it was a very narrow win, and now they're turning her into this sort of a female Saakashvili, if you will. Perhaps I'm exaggerating slightly, but there was some autocratic tendencies there. And then Pridnestrovia, obviously, they can't do anything against because Russia has it strategically to use it strategically against the collective West. And then you have Gagauzia region, who is basically saying, we don't want to be in this. We are basically their regional actors there are pro-Russian. Even in Gagauzia, they cannot touch that region, the collective West. They cannot do anything about. So they're pinning, Moldovans and Romanians against each other. You are pro-Western, you are pro-Russian, you are backward. We are the light of sort of the Romanian civilization. The same patterns that we've seen in Georgia. In terms of going back into to NGOs, in Georgia, NGOs were backed so powerfully from Washington that they basically had the power to overthrow a legitimate government. And that's what NGOs are not supposed to do, correct? This is not the job of the NGO to overthrow governments. And our colleagues, I mentioned Almut Rachinovsky, and even our good colleague with, from the Quincy Institute, Anatol Levin said, what are NGOs doing trying to overthrow the government of Georgia? So you see to what extent and how far the West has gone, that quote unquote the symbol of democracy, where you have these sort of checks and balances that NGOs are supposed to point out, they are really abandoning that very purpose of what an NGO is supposed to be, and they're allowing themselves to become weapons of this neoliberal, neoconservative project against a basically against democracy, right? Against democracy. When you are elected democratically, that's it. Then you have to do everything possible to either win that election through that democratic process or just go out of politics and leave politics. But no, this is not. NGOs have always been the instrument since the early 90s in Georgia to have this unfettered access into the society and against the government. And now it peaked to the point where they actually posed a serious threat that it would overthrow the government of Georgia. So I think the pattern is the same in Armenia, except with Azerbaijan, because we all know this that's a vertical power structure that Azerbaijan has. But in Armenia, in Georgia, in Romania, I think that pattern is very similar.
Yeah. One final question.
Unfortunately,
Lasha, from far, why is NATO expanding to the Caucasus? Or why is it trying to expand to the Caucasus?
That's an excellent question. Strategically, there is no reason. Just like in Ukraine, just like Ukraine for the collective West and for Washington presents no vital national security interest, no strategic interest, the same goes for the South Caucasus. This region presents no national security or geopolitical interest for Washington. In my view, and there has been work done on this, is that the reason this escalated to the point where Washington found the audacity to say that NATO would go into the remote South Caucasus is because of the unipolar moment that lasted for 30 years. I think it stems mostly from sort of the international relations system and structure. Sort of this neoliberal internationalism, liberal hegemony. There were so many names for these now. I think that has a lot to do with it. And Washington's obsession with Russia and its sort of perpetual sort of expectation that any time now Russia will come back and re-challenge the United States strategically. I think that paranoia is deeply entrenched in Washington. but mostly sort of on material terms, the change in the, the collapse of the Soviet Union. And the irony here is that with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the strategic threat disappeared, and yet Washington still continued, right? This push, Yugoslavia and the Balkan states and the bombing of Kosovo, was part of this, finding the reason why NATO was supposed to exist or continue to exist. So I attribute, I know it's perhaps sort of an umbrella, sort of overall answer, but I think I attribute that mainly to this paranoia that and really hatred of Russia, saying that Soviet Union disappeared, but we will never make Russia our peer, even though Putin tried so many times after he came to, when he first came to power in 2001, since he's been trying to find some common ground with Washington, asking for it to become a member of NATO. And then all Washington gave it was the Partnership for Peace and all these secondary and third-rate programs to make it feel as if it still mattered. And I think, it got to the point where the first and the second tranche of NATO expansion was not enough, caused by what I just said, in my opinion, meaning that whole unipolar moment, and they realized that they had to, for all the wrong reasons, wanted to now take on Ukraine and Georgia. And by the way, Georgia was the first one on the receiving end of this foolish strategy, right? It was in 2008 in the Bucharest summit. Or was it 2007? Well, it was a critical moment in 2008 when Putin came out. We all know that speech. And he said, enough is enough, basically. But so that's the reason, in my view, why NATO has wanted, rhetorically and in terms of propaganda, at least, to expand into the South Caucasus, and the authors of which, of this strategy, knew perfectly well that this was going to piss Russia off. I mean, we've all over the years have talked about this. So that will be my answer, my long answer to that question.
Lasha Kazaradze, thank you very much for joining us on the Duran. Thank you for answering the questions from the listeners. One more time, where can people follow your writings, follow your work?
I've written my most recent article is sort of a long piece written on Georgian domestic politics as a reaction to the Megobari Act that the Joe Wilson in Congress through Helsinki or the Helsinki. It's part of the U.S. Senate, the Helsinki organization. They're pushing this Megobari Act that is putting sanctions on Georgia. They want to sort of push it now through the Senate, and they hope that President Trump will approve it. But my article was in reaction to that, so that article can be found on Acura. My good friend James Corden published it, as well as on neutrality status on Pascal Lotas, our colleague and friend, and I've also written for the national interest in the past. New Eastern Europe also has some of my articles that I've written in the past. So those are the platforms. Once we have more to come, I'll definitely mention that on your channel as well. And we're also working on sort of turning this forum event into an annual event. But the work continues on that, and I will keep everyone posted on on new developments.
Thank you so much, Lasha, for joining us.
Lasha, thank you very much for coming on.
It's been a privilege. Thank you.
Right. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.
All right, Alexander, you with us?
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's answer the remaining questions.
Mm-hmm.
From Nikos. Last time I got a lot of hatred from my fellow Duranians for criticizing my side for what I see as inaction and ineffectiveness. Normally it doesn't affect me, but then you talked about it in a video. Where's the second part? I don't know why calling out dumb decisions like letting Azerbaijan ruin the Caucasus or allowing the West to strike Russia and then doing nothing is considered a bad thing. I'm not propagandized. Part 3 says, I believe that we should recognize our mistakes in order to improve ourselves, even on the side we support. Right now, I believe that if a nuclear detonation happened in Russia, they would do nothing. And I am sorry for offending the copium of people, but I am not a blind follower. I can say things like not borrowing money from China when Russia's debt is low in order to help the economy is dumb.
Well, because there's a lot there.
Oh, one
Personally,
more. Part 5. Part 5. Let me be clear. I support Russia. I love Russia. But when they do dumb stuff, I will call it out because they need to improve and we need to acknowledge it. And I think you understand this, Duran.
Well, first of all, I mean, can I just say, Nikos, you are absolutely entitled to have your views and to state them, and you should be treated with respect when you do so. So if somebody treated you with disrespect and you were criticized inappropriately in that way, well, then I am very sorry. And I apologize on behalf of everybody on the Duran for that. Having said that, just as you have your views, we are not obliged to agree always with your views. To give an example, if there was a nuclear strike on Russia, can I absolutely tell you, there would be an immediate and overwhelming reaction. If you're talking about Azerbaijan, the situation in the South Caucasus is extremely complex, but you heard Lasha's views, and he comes from the region. He does not believe that this conflict between Azerbaijan and Russia is for real or that it will endure for very long, and nor do I. And can I also say that having been to the region, your perspectives change very radically when you are there and when you spend time there. You begin to understand better how disconnected from the actual events on the ground a lot of the commentary that you read actually is. There is an awful lot of posturing. There's an awful lot of adjustments. All kinds of things are going on in the South Caucasus. But I think that a lot of these ideas that there's some kind of alliance being set up against Russia there, for example, is a mirage. And the closer you get to it, the more obvious that becomes. So that's the first thing. But of course, the Russians make mistakes. And you gave an example. You said maybe they should borrow money from China to develop their domestic economy. Well, maybe they should. I'm not saying that they shouldn't. All I am saying is at the moment they're not doing that, and I don't think they feel the need to. And whether the Chinese would be prepared to lend the money in that way, I'm not sure about that either. But there it is. But they are borrowing, they are seeking investment from other countries. And given the experience Russia had with borrowing from the West, maybe it's understandable why they don't want to borrow now. But anyway, a lot of points, but you made a rather complex set of points yourself there.
Sanjeva says, thank you for all that you do, Duran. Thank you so much for that super chat. Don Zuger says, a bad word, Israel. Thank you for that. Super chat. Matthew says, tactical nukes in the UK, a meaningless provocation. Will the US attack Russia directly?
Well, I can't imagine this. And Britain getting tactical nuclear weapons. I mean, again, what really do we think we are doing? I mean, again, becoming airstrip one. We know what that refers to. That's what Britain came to be called in George Orwell's novel 1984. Airstrip one against Russia. I mean, it's foolishness. It's not going to change the geostrategic balance. It's not going to scare or intimidate the Russians. It could simply get us into more trouble in the long term.
Haruko, thank you for that super chat. Sanjeva says, Alex, there's an echo. Don Zuger says, you have an echo. I think that got sorted out as the live stream went along, but thank you for those messages. Let's see. Nikos asked about Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Yeah.
Elza says, can you be less democratic than the EU?
Good question. No, I think it is the most anti-democratic structure that exists anywhere in the world at the moment. It is a self-appointed, self-created bureaucracy that functions entirely independently of elections and which isn't even anchored in a particular state or nation. So, I mean, it is a monstrosity, and it is profoundly non-democratic.
Yeah. Nico says, I saw Ukrainian videos with their usual feel sorry for me stick, and I want to ask, is there time for us to blame the citizens for their actions or inaction towards the people of Donbass? There are consequences, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, there are. I think this is, again, a very complex topic. I think if you're talking about the vast majority of people in Ukraine, I'm talking now about central and western Ukraine. In central Ukraine, I don't think they particularly wanted this war. In western Ukraine, I'm afraid a lot of people did, because the population there has become deeply radicalized. And to be clear, I think this is something that has happened over the last 30 years. I don't believe it goes back much further than that. That's my own view. But I think that where a lot of the blame lies is with the kind of NGO bourgeoisie in Kiev, very similar to the similar bourgeoisie in Tbilisi and Yerevan and Chisinau and Bucharest, who are extremely structurally anti-Russian, tolerated absolute horrors being played out around them, looked the other way whilst Donbass was, well, didn't look the other way, cheered on whilst Donbass was being shelled, and brought that nation to disaster.
Nick, thank you for that super sticker. Nico says, can you please explain Obama to me? I remember this guy's a rock star, and him and Putin posed as the two men holding the world together. I considered Hillary as the globalist puppet master. Does Obama hate Russia this much?
Yes, I find it very difficult to talk about Obama because of all American politicians recently, he is the one that provokes the strongest feelings on my part. Suffice to say, he is a deeply manipulative and treacherous individual. That's about the gentlest things I can say about him. But the other thing about him is that he's one of those people who's very, very clever at using others and at hiding behind others to conceal what he does. I figured that out long ago, and I've discussed in many programs that reading his speeches used to give me a headache because every sentence says the opposite of what it means.
Yeah. Don Zuger says, do an interview with Svetlana Vladimirova, please.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Nico says, and I will end it on a funny note. I recently found out that there's a perfume called Zelensky made in Israel. You cannot make this stuff up, man. We found the actual Zelensky number 5. Actually, you're
absolutely
correct,
you're completely correct. There is yeah, that's true.
Peter S, thank you for that super sticker. William says, Brian Berletic says the protagonists behind Project Ukraine don't care. Ukraine can't win. It's to keep Russia busy so they can get up to shenanigans in the Middle East and the Caucasus.
I entirely agree with that. I believe that there is a planning group in Washington that has exactly this kind of strategy. The big question, however, is, and it's a question I've made many times, is who is actually exhausting who? I mean, it's American inventories that are getting run down. It is America and the West that is piling on debt. It is the United States that's getting distracted and bogged down in conflicts all over the place. So it seems to me that this strategy, which absolutely does exist, is producing the exact opposite outcome to the one intended.
Toilet Sauce says he called Aliyev a friend of Georgia. That says more about Georgia than Azerbaijan. Naive doesn't even begin to describe it.
Well, I think that there's been a long-standing relationship between Georgia and Azerbaijan, which is in mutual interest. And I think the point that Lasha is making is that these are small countries. They need to maneuver very carefully. They need to maintain good relations with each other, which by and large they do, by the way. And they need to avoid getting drawn into superpower games if they're going to preserve their independence and ensure their own development. When you are in Georgia, and I met quite a lot of people from Armenia, by the way, while I was in Georgia too, that becomes extremely clear.
Yeah. William says Ukrainians are considered disposable. Sticky Mark says, Su Lubovyu, I'd rather mount my horse and ride out to meet my destiny than go remain and be trampled into the dirt by the stampede of fate. Genghis Khan loved and peace from this crazy lady-ish in Yorkshire.
Wow, okay,
gosh. Don Zuger says, never ask a woman her age, never ask a man his salary, and never ask an Israeli for evidence. Thank you for that. Flying Boar says, I hope there is a color revolution in Turkey because Erdogan is a spoiled brat and has been crossing too many red lines. I will not shed tears for it.
Well, I suspect he's there for a while. That's the truth of it. He is a very extraordinary personality. I mean, he's certainly left his mark on Turkey and on the region. He has achieved quite a lot in Turkey itself. But my own personal view is that with every year that passes, he undermines and spoils his own achievement.
Nico says, I also forgot, did you see Tucker's interview with that disgusting reporter from Build? I love Tucker. Man, he has become such a badass and can see the deference with this pause. All he said was, I hate Putin.
Yeah, and absolutely. I did see it. I thought it was quite brilliant. And I thought it was time somebody took on Bill Titan.
Yeah, you can see how delusional Build is when you listen to that editor as he interviews
absolutely.
Tucker. Yeah. You understand how they're so propagandized.
Yeah.
They believe it. That's the
absolutely.
Thing that I took away from
the German media, by the way, for those who don't know, is the absolute worst. Not just Bill Titan. It is worse than the British, much worse than the American. It is extraordinary the extent to which in Germany people still have independent minds, despite having a media like that. And Germany, unlike Britain, I've said this already, one of the things it does have is that it does have a certain independent media, not to the extent that the United States does, but there are alternative voices in Germany.
Sparky says, would it be a good idea for Tulsi Gabbard to be President Trump's golf partner instead of Lindsey Graham? I would think she already knows how to play golf.
Very good idea.
Zariel says the UK nukes can only be enabled by the US/NATO.
Well, exactly. So why go out of the way to have them? I mean, it's stupidity.
Yeah. Arcane Eclectic says, Alex, will you visit St. Petersburg on your trip? Not this trip, no. Sparky says, I'm sure the globalists not only custom curate much of the internet media content President Trump watches, they also curate what the First Lady watches, as well as others close to Trump.
Well, of course they do.
Jungle Jin says, European leaders consider Europeans expendable.
Sure enough.
Sparky says, if you can't trust Erdogan, who can you trust?
Very good question.
William says, I agree with you that in trying to overextend Russia, the West has overextended itself. True?
Exactly.
And Jungle Jin says, Australian media is worse than German media.
I believe that's true also, but I don't know it so well.
Yeah. All right, Alexander, final thoughts and we'll wrap up.
Well, I want to finish. I want to finish with just two things. And these things that I actually, took back from Georgia. Firstly, about the importance of Christianity and the church there. Several people in Georgia, I'm talking about people on the street, told me that they would fight to the death for their church. I don't believe Armenia is different, by the way. So, I mean, there was that, and they might not even be particularly religious, But the church is absolutely central to their identity. The other thing which I find even more extraordinary, and I just want to pass on, is that in Tbilisi, at the very center of it, there is a gigantic building which Saakashvili built as his presidential palace. It is completely empty. Nobody will tell you what it is. The guides refuse to even notice it. People are so ashamed of it, and at the same time so horrified by that period, that it's as if they want to just draw a curtain and pretend the thing isn't even there. It was very strange.
All right. Thank you to Lasha. Thank you to everyone that watched us on Odyssey and Rockfin, Rumble, and YouTube, as well as the Duran.locals.com. And thank you to our moderators, Valies in the house, Zariel, Peter. Who else is moderating? I think that's everyone that was moderating. So thank you to our moderators. I hope I didn't miss anybody. Alexander, I think we can wrap up this live stream.
Indeed.
And we can get back to work.
Get back to work, indeed.
All right. All right. Take care, everybody.
Have a very good day, everybody. Yeah.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.